Every now and then, a book comes along that it seems like everybody is reading. You know, your mom's reading it, your aunt's reading it, people on social media are reading it, or it shows up in the news, that sort of thing. Today, we're going to talk about one of those books. Hey everyone, Adam Holz here, your host of the Plugged In Show, Focus on the Family's weekly conversation about entertainment, pop culture, and technology. Thanks so much for joining us today. Well, the book I am talking about is The Anxious Generation by psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He's really been one of a handful of people that I would say are at the vanguard of social science, trying hard to understand why the arrival of smartphones and social media has correlated with this enormous spike in anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, especially among teens and adolescents. So it's a subject that we talk about a lot on the Plugged In Show, but I think Haidt deals with it in a way that really takes us even deeper than some of the conversations that we have had. So Bob Hoose and Jonathan McKee will be joining me today to talk about that. Hey guys, thanks for joining me. And in our second segment, we're going to shift gears a bit and do a little bit of celebrating. And Bob, you're going to help us celebrate as well. No, it's not Bob's birthday. At least I don't think it is.
No,
it's not your birthday, is it? Okay.
I stopped.
That's a good program. It's like when your odometer quits working. It really doesn't matter.
Forget it.
How many miles are on. So we're going to talk about the 1,000th episode of Focus on the Family's long-running radio drama, Adventures in Odyssey. And you might be surprised to learn that Adventures in Odyssey played a pivotal role in bringing Mr. Hoose to us here at Plugged In. So I can't wait to unpack your origin story as it relates to Adventures in Odyssey and Plugged In, Bob.
It has nothing to do with kryptonite.
Nothing to do with kryptonite, which actually turns out is not real.
No.
I mean, sorry. Spoiler warning. Well, before we dive into today's show, I want to say thanks for joining us each week as we talk about screens, as we talk about entertainment, as we talk about how these things influence and shape your family and especially your kids growing up today. We love connecting with you and talking about these things. And if you've been blessed by the Plugged In Show, there are 3 ways that you can help us bring you more episodes in the future. First, just tell your friends. Really, word of mouth is the best way to get the word about our show out there. Second, you can leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And third, we would love it if you'd make a donation to the show. We are a donor-supported ministry here at Focus on the Family, and you can do that today with the donate link at the top of our podcast page, The Plugged In Show. And of course, we'll leave information in the episode notes for today's show about how you can do that. So thanks for considering that. All right, guys, let's dive into the icebreaker, and then we'll get into the meat of this conversation about Jonathan Haidt's book. So what would you say the most important or the best book is that you have read in the last decade or so, and why? And Bob, you're our book guy, so it's almost not even a fair question for you.
But most of the time I'm reading novels, not important books.
Well, and it could be that you read a novel that impacted you deeply too.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You want me to start?
I do.
I think probably the one I'm currently reading. I'm reading a book. It's actually more of an autobiography of Napoleon.
Oh, wow.
Napoleon, A Life. Andrew Roberts is the author's name. And it's really good. I mean, I was spurred to read it after watching that abysmal Napoleon movie that came out last year. But I thought, well, what an interesting character. And I had never read anything about Napoleon. And I think when we read books about important people that have shaped the world, we can really gain from history. And so that's one I'd point to.
Great. And are you learning life lessons from Napoleon that you can apply to yourself?
Yeah, but I haven't, I don't put my hand in my coat yet or anything like that.
That's good. That might be a little weird. So anyway, before we get any weirder, I'm going to go on to Jonathan. Jonathan?
Okay. That's right. I'm reading an autobiography on Napoleon Dynamite, which is much better, actually. It includes Rex Kwon Do, which is my favorite chapter.
Talk about life lessons, right?
Right.
But I tell you,
I brought you this delicious bass.
That and the Pedro chapter just.
Yes.
No, I'm going to fall. I almost actually mentioned Jonathan Haidt's other book about the coddling of the American mind. But I'm full confession, I am the king at reading about 3 or 4 chapters of a book, and then it ends up on the shelf and I start
Right.
a next book.
Yep.
I loved the first 3 or 4 chapters of that book and hope to finish it soon. I love the entire book, though, of one that's been around for a while. And so I think my answer is truly Tim and Kathy Keller's The Meaning of Marriage. I just can't get enough of Tim Keller. Love his podcast, but that book, just talking about consumer relationships versus covenant relationships. And anybody in a marriage out there, if you haven't consumed that book, I encourage you, because wow, what a great book. So
That's awesome. So I am going to pick a book. I think it came out. I didn't actually look up the copyright date. It's probably been about 10 years ago, 2015, 2016, called The Paradox of Choice. And I think the subhead is Why More is Less by Barry Schwartz. And he's a social psychologist. And he talks about our culture of choice and that we almost unconsciously subscribe to the idea that more is better than less. And in America, especially, we're overrun with choices. But he unpacks the premise that that there could be a correlation between depression and an overload of choice. That when we have more choices, we can get locked up. And he talks about 2 different kinds of personalities, maximizers and satisficers. And satisficers, it's a word he admits he made up. They can pretty much make do with stuff. And so if they go to buy clothes, they don't look for the best product or the best sale. And he talks about it a lot in terms of consumption choices. And he says satisficers are actually reasonably content, well-adjusted people. But he said maximizers are anxious. We tend to be depressed. And I, put myself among them, because we're always looking for the best, whether that's the best deal or the best example of something. And in a world full of functionally, if not infinite choice, I went to get peanut butter the other day and I'm standing there looking at 14 different kinds of peanut butter. That's an example, of I want to make sure I get the right one. And that if you're constantly worried about making the best choice, you actually can just get locked up on things that don't really matter. And
Very American culture, though, right?
It is. And I think in some ways, there are parallel connections from that book to what we're going to talk about today with Jonathan Haidt. And if you're listening today, we would love to hear from you. What's your favorite book in the last decade or so, and why? We would love to hear your choices and your answers there, and you'll find information on connecting with us in the episode notes for today's show. All right, well, let's dive into the anxious generation. And every now and then, as I mentioned in the intro, it seems like everybody finds the same book at the same time. And this one's been out a little while, but man, I'm seeing references to it everywhere. Gene Twenge is another person we've talked about over the years who writes on the same subjects. And it feels like these 2 voices are 2 of the most significant voices in terms of trying to understand this correlation between social media and smartphones and what we've really seen, especially among teens in terms of mental health, starting about 2010 to 2012. And Jonathan Haidt really digs into what changed and what happened. And so there's an enormous amount of stuff in this book.
Right.
Bob, when you read it, you came back and said we could do a year's worth of podcasts on the ideas packed in there.
Like the first 3 chapters, like Jonathan was talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. Bob, I would love to just hear from you as we kick off our conversation. How would you describe the general thrust of Haidt's thought here?
Well, I think, it comes down to the title, talking about the anxious generation. In a way, he's saying that almost accidentally, we as parents, as a culture, have sort of started programming our children to be anxious people. And we're not doing it on purpose. In fact, we as adults are just as impacted by some of the negative aspects of technology, the internet, social media, that sort of thing. And because we're impacted negatively, without even knowing it, we're impacting our kids negatively. And we're creating this sense of anxiety in our children. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that and like the difference between fear and anxiety and things like that. But there was one thing, when I was reading through, I was taking some notes, and I brought some of the notes with me because there was one thing I thought I should read, and that's a quote from Haidt. He says, Gen Z became the first generation in history to go through puberty with a portal in their pocket that called them away from the people nearby and into an alternative universe that was exciting, addictive, unstable, and unsuitable for children and adolescents. And I thought that sort of summed up, what he's trying to say here. He's taking us by the collar and saying, wake up, guys. And in a very real sense, these are the kinds of things we've been talking about for a long time, and his work supports some of the ideas that we have had in a lesser degree. I mean, our ideas aren't up to his standard, but the same kind of themes we've been talking about too.
Yep. Jonathan?
Yeah. Well, great book. And I mean, if you're looking for real world application, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of books. It's like, I feel like a lot of parents are like, give me something I can use today with my kid and this phone. And so I'm a big application guy. I like this because, I mean, not only does he give these 4 foundational harms, some people they'll just do that. They'll be like, here's the situation our world is in. Ponder that. Good luck. But he also gives 4 foundational reforms. And it's really cool too, because he's kind of got these two, not conflicting, but if you think about this, the overprotecting and underprotecting. He says we're overprotecting children in the real world and underprotecting them online. And I love that because, we got this concept of like helicopter parenting where we don't even let them go outside and do things because we're scared. So what do? We slap them down in front of a screen and underprotect them there. And that's a great premise that really can kick off our discussion today is, what are these dangers? I mean, if we want to get down to brass tacks, what are these dangers and what can we do about it?
Well, and I think that is a great place to kick things off. And I love the way he defines the terms real world and virtual world. And I want to read just a little bit, and I recognize this is a little bit unusual for the kind of conversations that we often have, but I think these ideas are so foundational in terms of understanding how they're extrapolating the harms, and we'll talk about the harms and then talk about the reforms, Jonathan. But he says, quote, when I talk about the real world, I'm referring to relationships and social interactions characterized by 4 features. So I'm going to read through those. They are embodied, meaning that we use our bodies to communicate. We're conscious of the bodies of others, and we respond to the bodies of others both consciously and unconsciously. And I would step out here and say the biblical word for that is incarnation, right? That we're physically present with each other in the flesh. And Shane Hipps talks about that in his book, Flickering Pixels. Then he says they're synchronous, which means they're happening at the same time with subtle cues about timing and turn taking. They involve primarily one-to-one or one-to-several communication with only one interaction happening at a given moment. They take place in communities that have a high bar for entry and exit so that people are strongly motivated to invest in relationships and repair rifts when they happen. And so then he contrasts that with the virtual world. And it's sort of like when I read this, the light bulb went on. I'm like, oh, it's not the same. And he articulates 4 important differences for how these things are different and then the consequences of that. He says, these interactions in the virtual world are disembodied, meaning no body is needed, just language. They are heavily asynchronous, happening via text-based posts and comments, although live video is synchronous. And I'll just pause here and say that one thing my girls have started doing, which I find fascinating, weird, and kind of disturbing, is they no longer have video chats with their friends. They will take a video of themselves, send it to their friends respond to their video with another video. And so it's almost like it's blurring video chat and texting. And I asked one of my daughters about it, and she's like, well, there's just a lot of pressure to have to respond right away. And this way we can think about what we're going to say.
And you can make it look as good as possible.
But I'm talking about with their best friends, right? And wow, why can't you just have a conversation? Well, we don't do that anymore. I'm like,
well, and think of what this is doing. Think of the future of, we have lots of conversation around my office about AI and how much AI is starting to write emails for us and write everything for us. And I just thought we're going to have a generation in about 20 years that can't talk, can't write, honestly, and I'm trying not to sound like, grumpy old, get off my lawn. But I mean, we're heading that direction, because a lot of young people are having difficulty communicating on the fly. And my gosh, in schools, and we can get to this because, Jonathan Haidt does it well as he talks about some of the things we should do. But in schools, man, I tell you, good old like debate club, stuff like this where kids are actually, have to on their toes think and grab research without Googling it really quick. These are the skills we still need to teach our kids. Still, it's not, these aren't new skills. This is just retaining old skills that we still need to teach.
Yeah, and the things you've been reading, they sound a little clinical, but it's his way of helping describe it clearly so that we understand what he's talking about. And it really does make sense when you step back from it and you just look at how kids would normally interact. Took away the phone, took away the screens, you just put a bunch of them in a room with some toys or whatever. They would interact with one another and create this social system, so to speak, where they're admiring some of the kids because they might be really smart or they might be great athletes or whatever. And within that group, they're also experimenting with their own limits. Like I remember I was reading a little article about a woman who was sort of beside herself because she had sons and some of their friends, and they were playing in the front yard. And they somehow got a ladder, and they climbed up the ladder to the branch and then jumped down. And she was thinking, oh, no, somebody's going to hurt themselves. But it's that sort of pushing your limits that is actually very healthy for kids, and that interaction. And I think those kinds of things happen naturally, but we've taken them out of the natural world now by being, the helicopter parents who say, no, you're going to hurt yourself. You can't go out. In fact, adults, I think, we've become more anxious too because of the very same reasons. We see things on social media or we see things on the internet, and they've heightened our awareness that danger is everywhere. But the fact is that if you look at statistics, violent crime has come down. A lot of things have actually gotten better in some ways. But we're more afraid of them. And so we grab our kids and we bring them inside and we give them a screen.
Well, and he talks about the importance of play and of risk-taking, that it's in that risk-taking that we naturally experience limits and consequences. And it's important for us to develop not only learning how to learn about our world, but resilience. And when we're in this constant protective mode, we have anxiety about everything because we're trying to control everything. I mean, I remember, back in the day, the glorious 80s, my friends and I got together one day and we're throwing fireworks at each other. And one of them went off in my hand. That was a learning point, right?
No kidding.
My hand was numb for 3 hours. And my takeaway was, the next time we play games, let's not use fireworks in our hands. Right? Now, could I have gotten seriously injured? I probably could have. I got stitches in every limb. I had broken bones. I had concussions. And I think I'm mostly okay. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. My children take issue. But when we're just coddling and protecting, and that gets back to his previous book. I mean, there's so much here we could talk about. But when we take play off the table, and I'm going to talk about it more here in just a minute, we're really shrinking our kids' worlds and their ability to learn about themselves, about their identity, all of that stuff.
And we make them more afraid of the future too. I mean, think about all the stories we've heard of kids on college campuses who just can't hear somebody else's opinion because that will hurt their feelings. They're so isolated.
It triggered.
You triggered.
Yes, there's
the trigger word. And it's funny because Okay, listeners, I'm 54. I'm not that old, but I tell you, I
younger
just
every
laugh.
day, isn't it, Jonathan?
I was out on I can't even say I was out on a run. I was out on a walk with intervals. Okay, that's how old I feel right now. I'm like doing intervals. Okay, because I can't even keep up the run. But I was out there doing that. And 3 kids passed by on their little motorized little scooter things as they're going. And I turned to my wife. I'm like, we used to pedal when I was a kid, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it's just so funny because I feel like that old man. And I thought, if I had kids today and my kid wanted one of those cool things, I wouldn't be like, no, you can't. I mean, the sad thing is the pressure is on.
Right.
The pressure is on with all this. But we have a society that is just kind of learning, differently than we learned. And they're not doing as much activity as we learned. And it's funny, like the trigger for, if a young person loses their job, sometimes it's like, well, I really need time now to recover mentally, so I'm going to take a few weeks. And they're missing key time to get out there and hit the pavement and put applications out, because for them, they need to recover mentally. And we've kind of created this world where that happens. And that's why I love what, Jonathan Haidt, we talk about a heightened sense, the Jonathan heightened sense of reality here, because he talks about these 4 foundational harms, and just, I won't even have to read, but just talks about, social deprivation, and gives like hard evidence of adolescents spending face-to-face time has dropped 50%. Pandemic, of course, affected that even more so, but we're talking pre-pandemic numbers.
Yep.
Sleep deprivation, and of course, smartphones make sleep worse.
Yep.
Attention fragmentation, because again, our minds are kind of learning differently how to pay attention to things. And of course, addiction.
Yep.
He calls smartphones dopamine slot machines. So think about this. This is the arena now that our kids are living, and parents are under this high pressure to, guaranteed, if your 14-year-old, your high school kid comes home and you've held out and haven't given them a smartphone, you could almost damage I'm going to just say it, you could almost damage your relationship with your kid if you're, it's like telling your daughter, no, you can only wear dresses down to the ankles and this bonnet to school. That's what it's like, and so some of us, we cave, and it's hard. And that's why I love the fact, spoiler alert, that in his advice, he's telling parents advice, but he's also kind of imploring, and this is something that he and Dr. Twenge did back in 2020 in the research. They were imploring middle schools, hey, let's gather together as schools and let's let everyone know that it's okay for our kids not to have phones yet. Let's tell parents, don't get your kids phones yet until they're at least 13. His ideas are amazing. I'm just thrilled with his heightened sense of, hey guys,
I see what you did there.
Not only no smartphones before high school, but no social media before 16.
Yeah, and those are in his 4 core reforms,
it is,
right?
And his other 2 are phone-free schools and far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. But I mean, if you put those first 3 together, no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools. Phone-free schools will help those first 2, and it'll help parents maybe kids wouldn't feel that pressure as much because during lunch, those phones don't come out. During breaks, those phones don't come out. During school, so I mean, I haven't met Jonathan, but not only do you have a cool name, thank you, sir, for bringing this Jonathan heightened sense.
Yeah, and I think that you just talked about play and how important that is, and I think it's possible for us perhaps to minimize the developmental importance of play. Like you wouldn't necessarily think kids playing is hugely important for their development as human beings and into maturity on all sorts of levels. But he really unpacks this, and I want to just include a couple quotes here. He says, quote, "A play-based childhood is one in which kids spend the majority of their free time playing with friends in the real world, as I defined it in the introduction, embodied, synchronous, one-to-one, in groups where there's some cost to join or leave." So you can see the problem when adolescents start spending the majority of their waking hours on their phones and other screens, sitting alone watching YouTube videos on autoplay or scrolling through bottomless feeds on TikTok. Even if the content on these sites could be filtered effectively to remove obviously harmful material, The addictive design of these platforms reduces the time available for face-to-face play in the real world. The reduction is so severe that we might refer to smartphones and tablets in the hands of children as experience blockers. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It's more than just, it's fun to go out and ride your bike, right? Because I think when you just talk about play, as a parent, I could think, okay, how important is this really? But it's foundational. And I think this book really made that clear to me.
It's going back to what Bob was saying earlier about, like literally climbing a tree and doing some of these things. Jonathan actually calls it more, and the word caught me by surprise for a second, far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. So there's, on one hand, you're saying, hey, let's have a lot more guidance when it comes to the screens, right? And a lot of the parents that love rules and all, they're like, yeah, guidance, that's great. Oh, more rules, but then he goes, and more unsupervised when it comes to playtime. Wait a sec. I have to let and here's the first thing I thought of. I remember observing someone talking to a kid and asking questions like, hey, tell me about school. We're talking a junior high school age kid. I don't know how old the kid was, asking these really cool questions. And all of a sudden, like, the parents saw this mentor kind of ask the question and came over and sat down right next to the kid and was kind of fascinated with like, oh, what questions are you asking my kid? And the parent just starts answering every question for the kid. And the kid quickly just kind of was quiet and basically let dad take over. And that's the first thing I thought of with more unsupervised. It's where we just kind of helicopter in sometimes to come in and let me protect him because I don't know what questions are going to be asked here. And it was a safe setting. This kid was not in danger.
Right.
It was just questions. But he thought, let me go check this out. Guess what? Our kids are going to encounter this. They're going to, in college for sure, they're going to be out on their own and they're going to have to engage in conversations, and if we save them from conversations, we're not helping them. So maybe unsupervised play. That's what I think he's getting at there a little bit.
And one of the things that stood out to me when you were reading his quote was him talking about the cost of joining a group. And, I mean, instantly we might think, is that a bad thing? No, the fact is that kids joining in with other kids, there is a certain cost. You've got to sort of learn the rules. You've got to sort of figure out how it works back and forth. And those are all things that you have to use later in life.
Right.
And if you take them all away, if you take that social interaction away and that cost, then there's no gain.
Right.
And if there's no gain, then they're going to, at some point, run into that wall where, okay, now I'm in the real world and I don't know how to
do this. Right. He has a segment of this book. I mean, there's so many things, and we'll obviously have to bring this in for a landing here fairly shortly. But he talks about the process of sort of socialization and understanding a given social system's sort of mores and norms. And he said what social media has done is that you can, in a couple of hours, scroll through posts, see what's liked, see what's commented on. And he said what it's done is it's put an accelerator on this conformity process without the socialization component of learning how to relate to other kids. And I thought, wow, that was really interesting to me in terms of, I would say, an unintended and negative consequence from something as simple as a like button on, Facebook or Instagram. Jonathan, you look like you're ready to jump in with a thought there.
Well, I don't know why, but I can't help but think when it's you see these things about how we're too, we're not strict enough with our rules on screens, but yet we're so strict on play, and how the two of them are kind of like two fighting forces. I think, to quote the great James L. Brooks, there was a Simpsons episode in one of the early years, and some of our listeners who grew up on it might remember this, but and it won't even get into the social commentary, but they're very, very brilliant writers that, not endorsing it, but there's this one episode where in the early years where Itchy and Scratchy, this really this terrible cartoon show that kids shouldn't be watching, right? But all the kids are watching, and they're kind of making fun of that kids are growing up watching this. Well, Marge, of course, decides that she wants to try to, hey, this is harmful stuff. Let me see what I can do to censor this. And so censorship happens, and I won't get into the social commentary of it, but when censorship happens, the show turns lame, and there's this one scene that I always think of when we have the smartphone discussion. When Itchy and Scratchy got lame, they show this beautiful little montage where all the kids they turn off the TV, and they walk outside, and they literally are like rubbing their eyes and yawning and awakening, and they start jumping in trees and playing and running. And it was this beautiful depiction of, hey, if the screens got turned off, what would actually happen?
Yeah.
And they showed these kids going out and playing. I always think of that because study after study over the years that I've quoted, and you'll find them, I've written about them, whenever you see like an experiment where they have kids go to a camp for a couple weeks and they take screens away, the researchers always predict, and they're looking for these signs of anxiety and withdrawal symptoms and all this, but they're always surprised, and almost every one of those studies always comes up with them saying, we were surprised how happy and satisfied kids were. Literally in the 90-something% of kids will say that they really want to go back and implement what they learned, back at home, and maybe less screen time. And it's not because they experienced something. They were able to communicate better. There's studies that actually talk about the communication that went on, and they actually started forming sentences better. It's amazing what happens. And it's literally like that scene in The Simpsons where it's like, rub your eyes and, oh my gosh, play. So that's the first thing I thought of when I read this, is play really is kind of almost the alternative to this other stuff.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And the irony of the whole conversation is we're raising an anxious generation, but we're anxious as parents about maybe the wrong things, right? We're anxious to overprotect, whereas we might, do well to have a little bit more anxiety about the stuff that actually is wrecking our kids mentally, which is everything we've been talking about today.
But we kind of think it's safer.
Yeah.
In some strange way, we think it's safer because they're in the house with a screen, where it's actually a lot more dangerous.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when I tell my children, stories about the good old days before the internet, I actually feel sorry for them, that we grew up in a time when in the summer I would leave the house at 9 o'clock in the morning and I'd show up at 9 o'clock at night, and nobody knew where I was. And not that I was out doing nefarious things. Most of the time I wasn't. Occasionally, perhaps a little bit of nefarious crept in there.
Little dabbles.
A little dab. But what a glorious thing to just be out. And I don't want to turn
on your
this
bike, pedaling.
Yeah, on my bike. Totally. I mean, it was Stranger Things without,
it was
the upside down, basically. And I don't want to end this conversation by nostalgizing a time that probably is never going to come again in the same way. But when my girls are playing volleyball and they hit the volleyball over our back fence, which goes into a park, and they literally have to walk about 4 blocks around the fence to get the ball, that's okay. And if they want to take the shortcut and climb the fence, instead of me saying, get the ladder out, you might fall. Yeah, they might fall.
Let me set up this mattress in case.
Right. Maybe they have a broken arm. I broke my arm. I lived through it. Right. So I think what Haidt's book does is it encourages me to maybe, not in an irresponsible way, but to loosen our grip on the fear and control of the environment, and to recognize that this digital world that they're in, he basically says it is causing a lot more problems than anything they're going to experience in all likelihood in the outside world. Right. So great conversation. I think obviously we could probably go another 2 hours on this.
The next chapter.
The next chapter. And I'm glad that there are social scientists out there. He's not coming from a faith-oriented perspective. This isn't a Christian book, but he makes some terrific observations. But if you are looking for a resource that does have that faith-oriented perspective, we have one for you. It's called Becoming a Screen Savvy Family. It's a book that our Plugged-In team wrote together, and we're exploring a lot of the same issues that Jonathan Haidt is talking about. and really looking at it from a worldview and from a faith-focused perspective, as well as giving you those practical and concrete helps that you need, that we all need, right? Because this is just the messy reality of where we're at in our families today. And as always, we hope that the conversations that we have on the Plugged In Show can also be a part of equipping you to deal with those challenges in your family. So thanks, guys, for our conversation today.
You bet.
Well, in our second segment today, we're going to keep Mr. Hoose on the proverbial line to talk about something really special. The 1000th episode of Focus on the Family's radio theater series, Adventures in Odyssey. Bob, I am excited to talk to you about this today because I'm sure that there are a lot of AIO, as we call it here, Adventures in Odyssey super fans out there. But I'm equally certain that there are probably some out there who don't know what it's all about. And I want to talk to them first. Give us just in a nutshell what Adventures in Odyssey is.
Well, it's a wonderful little show, actually. It's a radio show, radio drama that focuses on a small town called Odyssey. It's this all-American town filled with lots of interesting kids and adults, and they have adventures together that can reach anywhere, actually. But the central character is a guy by the name of John Whitaker, who's like this grandfatherly-like inventor who owns Wit's End. They call him Wit.
Right.
That's his nickname. Wit's End, which is an ice cream shop that all the kids flock to. And the stories are all about small town adventures, things that kids can identify with, and they're all family friendly and kid friendly. And they deal with things like lasting truths and making decisions in your life based on faith values and things of that nature. It's a wonderful show that's been running, almost 40 years now.
Yeah, the first episode, I have that information right in here.
Oh.
The first episode was November 21st, 1987, so almost 37 years ago. And and
the interesting thing about that is that when the show started, it was sort of, the sweet spot was kind of like 12-year-olds,
right?
You know? And so when I first came on board, I was always thinking in terms of a kid's show.
Yeah.
But it's been running so long that the audience has expanded and the age range has expanded. So we've got listeners and fans ranging from tweens up into their 40s.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting show, and that aspect has made the show even more dynamic, in my opinion.
I think so too. And I will say, you may not really be a student of television or, entertainment history, but 1,000 episodes is crazy. And like if we're talking primetime television, the longest running primetime show, Jonathan's not here for this segment, but he would appreciate this, is The Simpsons. Yeah. And it's almost 250 more episodes than The Simpsons. And then we get into stuff like Gunsmoke. Like, you've got to go to daytime soap operas that have been running for 60 years. That never end to even get in the same order of magnitude of this thing that I'm sure that when they started it, there was not a sense that this was going to run for 1,000 episodes.
Just aimed at helping the family, something giving the family entertainment, something fun and uplifting.
So here's my question for you, because I think in some ways it harkens back to, it really harkens back to a pre-TV age, when we're talking audio drama.
Right.
How do you think audio drama works differently than, say, a TV show? And why do you think it's still so popular when we have all these screens around us all the time?
When you stop and think about it, you were talking about pre-TV. The fact is that way back, the only entertainment that the average family could get was on the radio.
Exactly.
And so you turned on the radio and it had comedies and dramas and
H.G. Wells,
Jack Benny, and all those different shows. They were all on radio, and that was the only way you got it in your living room. And it was a great medium. It really was. It's creative. It forces you to use your imagination. But the great thing about
it's kind of like reading in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hearing it.
Right. I mean, and all of these shows, all of the new Odyssey shows are so well produced and engineered. And of course, they're using all these great sound effects and everything. But the fact is that radio drama forces you to just tune in with your imagination. And that's what makes it so long-lasting, I believe.
Yeah.
Because you can do anything and go anywhere with a radio drama. With a TV show, okay, they've got a certain number of sets, and that's where they stay.
Right.
But with a radio drama, you can go anywhere. And that's the great thing. Like I was talking about John Whitaker, Whit.
Yeah.
One of his inventions, for example, is the imagination station.
Yeah.
And that imagination station, it's sort of like the holodeck on Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
And you can go anywhere. And so they do biblical stories, they do historical stories. It's like a time machine. And we're able to weave all these tales and these lessons into these great adventures. And again, it's because it's radio drama, and there are very few limitations.
So, Bob, you have functioned practically in every role possible in some ways, because it's a big team that does this. But you're a producer, you've directed,
right.
You write. My guess is you've done some voice work from time to time as well, because you have a voice made for radio and a face for TV. Anymore. It's not even fair.
I just got this old man voice, and that's the one I do.
Yeah.
Welcome to Tony's Hawk and Shop. How can I help you? You're looking for goods or cash? I got both.
So I would love to just hear the Bob Hoose origin story. Like
how I got involved.
I teased in the intro, because if it weren't for AIO, we wouldn't probably have you here on our Plugged In team.
Well, it started out, I knew some people that were on the team. Paul McCusker, for example, was one of
on the AIO team.
Yes. Paul McCusker was one of the original creators, he and Phil Lawler. And in fact, there was just two of them when it first started. They were the only guys who wrote and directed and did everything. But I knew Paul pretty well because he had written some stuff for myself and a guy that I toured with named Jim. And we were sort of gearing down to the end of our touring days. And Paul came to me and said, hey, have you ever, because we had done some voiceover work for Adventures in Odyssey. He said, have you ever thought about writing a show? Because I had written plays and dramas and things for my touring years. And I said,
it makes it sound like you're 400 years old. I just want you to say that.
I am.
You've been around since the time of Shakespeare.
That's right. I used to wear bearskins. Anyway, he asked me, and I said, yeah, sure. But I was kind of reluctant because the idea of starting in this brand new genre for me, doing radio drama, I was sort of dragging my feet. But
and was it pretty early in the AIO run?
It was probably 20-some years ago. So that's not early in the run, but it was the beginning of 2000s that he asked me to come in and be involved. And I said, yeah, okay. And I eventually got around to writing something. And then one thing went to another, and it just, my role continued to expand. I became the producer that brought in the talent, and then writer, director, voiceover actors, things like that. Yeah. So a variety of different roles, and it's been great. I'll tell you, there's something about the experience of watching people enjoy Odyssey. And you think, well, how are you going to watch it? It's a radio show.
Right.
But over the years, we've had a variety of events where people have come out to see live shows with some of the actors.
And we're doing that here at Focus.
Exactly. And we're doing it for the thousandth episode. And it's just so much fun. The interaction. The people are such great fans. They love what Odyssey does and what Odyssey gives their families. And justifiably so, in my opinion, because I think it really is a good show.
Yeah. Well, and it may seem like a self-serving advertisement for Adventures in Odyssey, but the fact of the matter is we want to point people toward family-friendly alternatives.
We do.
And it's really terrific to have one in-house that we can recommend. One with such a rich history. I mean, going back to 1987, Guns N' Roses had just released their first album when Adventures in Odyssey started.
Well,
which is maybe a ridiculous comparison, but it's a long time ago.
It's the kind of stuff that even if you're not a family focused solely on faith.
Yeah.
Even if you're a family that's just sort of on the outside edges of faith or thinking in that direction, this is a very good show that applies to your family as well, because these adventures are real life types of things.
Yeah.
Oh, they sort of have an Andy of Mayberry flavor, only contemporary.
Yeah. Timmy and Lassie.
Yeah.
Kind of.
So it's got some of these classic, lifelong, lasting values, and they're fun shows. There's huge adventure. And by the way, you mentioned how Adventures in Odyssey got me to Plugged In.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you that story too.
I was going to circle back, so I'm glad you connected the dots.
I was working with the Odyssey team. I wasn't on the writing staff. I was an outside contractor, and I would drive down and be a part of the writing team. And at the time, as I said, I'd sort of just gotten off the road, and I was thinking about, okay, well, what's the next step? What am I going to be doing? I can do some freelance stuff like this. And then I thought, well, why don't I look at Focus? They didn't have any openings on the Odyssey team, but maybe something in Focus. And I found this little ad
for this weird little team.
Yeah, for this group called Plugged In that reviewed movies. And I thought, what a cool job.
Right?
Review movies. And I said, I'm going to apply for Plugged In. And the Odyssey team said, oh, no. No, you won't.
You don't want to work with them.
You won't fit. You won't fit. Because, the Odyssey team, they're all tossing jokes around all the time. And they had this perception of the Plugged In team being very serious. Right. A very serious group that
we were
sit
all
around,
Scrooge.
Counting F words and stuff like that, And little did they know that, and so anyway, I applied for it and got it. But little did they know that the Plugged In team, man, we are crazier than the Odyssey team sometimes. Yeah. I mean, just whack-a-doodle.
Yeah. No, we're crazier than anybody has any idea, except for the people who make the blooper reels.
Yeah.
So
You set me up, Paul.
I did.
it was
ubiquitous.
I signed you.
It was a ubiquitous biopic. It sounds like something you'd want to get removed, right?
Oh, no.
So that's how I got actually into Plugged In, and I have loved it ever since.
Well, I appreciate that. I love having you share a little bit of your story of your engagement with Adventures in Odyssey. And I think sometimes we think things just magically sort of pop into existence.
Yeah.
But there's a team of people who've come in and out of Odyssey who are as devoted or more devoted to it as we are to Plugged In, and really creating the very best family entertainment. And as you said, it now is a multi-generational thing.
That's right.
What a beautiful
thing.
thing.
And for those who have never experienced it, I want to say to you that not only is there a really good writing staff, the actors on this show are some of the best you will have ever heard.
Yeah.
There are some people on this show that are mesmerizing to watch just when you're directing them. They are so incredibly good. So I highly recommend it.
Very good. Thanks, Bob. And I hope as you've listened today, if you didn't know about Adventures in Odyssey, that maybe this piques your interest and whets your appetite, and you can find information about how to connect with Adventures in Odyssey in the episode notes for today's show. Well, now it's time for something we call Name That Movie, wherein we each give a log line, a brief little exaggerated, perhaps slightly humorous description of a movie, and the rest of us have to guess what it is. And this week, since we're talking about a book, I thought we would do the book edition. So this is movies that were based on a book. Who wants to go first today? Mr. Hoose?
I'll go, yeah.
You look like you're ready to go.
Nice.
Okay. A lovely young woman moves to a new town and instantly falls head over heels for this handsome guy who happens to be a little pale and hide a dark secret.
Oh, Twilight?
Yes.
Yay. See, you should have thrown sparkly in there. That would have
that's
confirmed
right.
it.
Sparkly. There you go.
Confirmed it for me. So
I was going to say powder? No.
So, all right, Twilight fans, what's the name of the town in Washington? Do you remember?
Oh, man.
No, that's I'm thinking of Twin Peaks. Anyway, I just saw an article this week about how people in that town are fed up with the Twilight heads.
Forks.
Yes.
Forks, Washington.
Forks, thank you, coming in because they're wanting to experience. I thought, man, this happens all the time. This is obviously not the purpose of this game, but I just saw that article this week.
Yeah.
I'm like, there you go. You know, it's happened in Astoria, Oregon with the Goonies, and there you go.
Yeah. Or me, Bodega Bay, the birds. I'm always like, oh, look, the
yeah.
schoolhouse. Oh,
Yep.
look, the Tides restaurant. So it's funny.
Jonathan, what you got?
Okay. A movie about kids, but not necessarily for kids, where a boy and his friends find an adventure and a body.
What was the? I can see the.
It's not Weekend at Bernie's.
I can see the publicity photo, but I can't remember the name. By my side.
It's based on a short story.
Stand By Me?
called
Stand By Me?
Is
The
it Stand
Body.
By Me?
Yes.
Stand By Me?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's based on a short story called The Body, written by,
Stephen King.
yeah. Same book as, I think, Shawshank and...
I was saying By My Side, which is, of course, the alternate title.
Right.
Stand By Me.
All right. Are you guys ready? I think you'll be
Yes.
able to get this one. Monkeys, bones, classical music, spaceships, and pod bay doors all come together in this epic sci-fi movie.
1969 film.
2001, A Space Odyssey, yeah.
Yes, I could see your faces weren't getting there, so I
was all
tossed.
this epic 1969 Stanley Kubrick film, but I
Yes.
don't know the name of it.
Yes, it's 2001, and what an odd piece of work it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed our show today and our attempts to stump one another, which we were kind of on our toes today. We mostly got it. Each week we talk about these things, and we hope that you're able to join our conversation as well. And I would love to know if you have read The Anxious Generation and what you thought of it, or if you are an Adventures in Odyssey fan. Bob's just told us a little bit about what it is all about and actually his involvement with it. So we would love to hear from you, and here's how you can connect with us. You can go to thepluggedinshow.com where you can leave us a voicemail. You'll see a little black tab that you can click on, and it will prompt you to leave us your message and your information. And we might actually use an audio clip from you on a future show. Or you can just reach out to us at team@thepluggedinshow.com, the old-fashioned way, right? Just send us an email, and we might include that as well. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, we have this book out called Becoming a Screen Savvy Family, and we think it will help you with all of the things we've been talking about today. Well, maybe not the Adventures in Odyssey part, but the screen part, definitely. And we would love to get that in your hands, and we want to make that as easy as possible for you. So today, for a gift of any amount, we'll send you a copy of the book, and it's kind of like the conversations we have here at the Plugged In Show, and we think it will be an incredible encouragement to you and your family, and you'll find information on how to do that in the episode notes for today's show. Well, thanks again for spending some time with us at the Plugged In Show this week. We know you have a lot of ways that you can spend your time, many of them obviously screen-oriented, so maybe in the next week we can all put our screens down and go for a walk, but let's reconvene next week, because you're not going to want to miss that episode of The Plugged In Show.
Hey parents, Parent here. I don't know about you, but most parenting advice I've found is a lot like my son's favorite foods, just beans and hot dogs. It's bland and way too juvenile for how old he actually is. But Focus on the Family's weekly age and stage emails have biblical stuff that helps me be intentional as a parent. It's great, like a chef salad of parenting tips. If you want biblical, practical, and personal tips to your inbox, here's how. Go to mykidsage.com, put in your kid's age, and get weekly emails that make a difference.